Dobby is happy to be with his friend, Harry Potter.
I think it's a fairly common idea out there that being good is boring, and so heaven must be this eternal snooze fest, attended by people who get a big kick out of going to church and singing hymns and playing bingo. But again, the true Christian tradition offers a very different perspective. The sharp, witty, and very lively St. Teresa of Avila, who was one of the greatest mystics in the history of the Church, prayed, "Lord, save us from sour-faced saints." And to those who know history and art, it should be no surprise that this quote came from St. Teresa. It was her mystical ecstasy, in which she described her very heart being pierced by the love of God, that served as the inspiration for Bernini's magnificent sculpture of her in Rome. That is not the face of a sour-faced saint. Okay, so we've got one example, but maybe she's a fluke. Good people don't really know how to have fun, do they? Especially those Christians who actually, try and do what Jesus said and pick up their cross and follow him. Right?
I thought we might hit this little snag.
In this video and the next three, we're going to look carefully at the connection between holiness and happiness by answering four big questions. What is goodness? What do we really want? What kind of good things won't be able to satisfy us? And finally, what can make us truly, perfectly happy? So let's start tackling the first question. What is goodness?
There is no good and evil. There is only power, and those too weak to seek it.
Well, apparently Lord Voldemort has some very strong opinions about what is the difference between good and evil. There isn't any. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised that one of the most hideously evil villains in all of literature has a little bit of a problem telling the difference between the two. But most of us, unlike Lord Voldemort, do have some sense that good and evil are not the same thing. But what is that difference? In the next few videos, we'll be looking at what specifically makes our choices good or evil, moral or immoral. But before we can get there, we need to have a better idea of these concepts in a general sort of way. To start this discussion, I'm going to throw out a crazy-sounding idea that was actually held by a very smart man, the Greek philosopher Aristotle. He said that goodness and being are really the same thing. And that should really sound strange. I mean, Voldemort exists, he has being, but he isn't good. In fact, he gets more being, more existence as the series goes on. He changes from this hideous little baby-like thing into a full-grown evil man in possession of all of his powers. So this theory doesn't look terribly promising. However, this idea is one that many people through the centuries, including some of the greatest lights of the Catholic Church, have bought into. St. Augustine of Hippo, St. Anselm of Canterbury, St. Thomas Aquinas. So to understand what they were thinking, we need to dig into what words like good and being really mean. We say lots of things are good. Crabbe and Goyle ate some good cupcakes. Crabbe and Goyle had a good nap. The way we use the word good in all these situations implies that there's something likable or desirable about those things. They have a special something that draws us towards them. So it seems that goodness is related to desirability. That connection between goodness and desirability shouldn't seem so terribly strange. After all, it's natural to desire good things. But now we're going to complicate the picture a bit. Let's take the Elder Wand. This beautiful wand was crafted by Death himself, is invincible in battle, and was last seen in the possession of Albus Dumbledore. This one-of-a-kind magic wand can be yours for only 25 easy payments of $99.99. So what do you say? Do we have a deal? Now, most of you watching probably have no intention of writing me any checks. If you do, please make sure my name is spelled correctly. But if you're not interested in buying such a fabulous little device, well, why not? My guess is that you aren't interested for the same reason Hermione wasn't interested in it through a good chunk of the Deathly Hallows. she didn't think it existed.
To Hermione Jean Granger, I leave my copy of the Tales of Beedle the Bard, in the hope that she find it entertaining and instructive.
She didn't even believe in the Peverell brothers, and at one point, at least in the books, accuses Ron and Harry of fitting the facts they have into the story of the three brothers. The reason for the split in our trio is because Ron and Harry believe that the wand exists and Hermione doesn't. And that is why they want to pursue it and she doesn't. Now, Hermione's not stupid. She knows how useful this sort of wand could be. But it doesn't matter to her how good the wand sounds. If it doesn't exist, if it doesn't have being, then it's not worth pursuing. And that sounds reasonable to me. So the conclusion of all of this is that if something is worth pursuing, well, it must have existence. If it's worth pursuing, then it's desirable and it's good, but only to the extent that it actually exists. Let me add just one more layer of complexity to this whole goodness equals existence idea, and that's to bring in the idea of perfection. The more something is perfect, the more existence it has. Now, again, this might sound strange, but we operate out of this mentality every day. Take an ordinary wand, like Ron's, for instance.
Wingardium Leviosa.
It works perfectly fine, even if Ron doesn't. At the beginning of the Chamber of Secrets, though, Ron's wand loses some of its perfection. And the power it once had is diminished.
Eat slugs.
Or at least going in the wrong direction.
Say something.
Ron's wand is less desirable once it's been broken, which means it loses some of the goodness that it had. Some of the power that it previously possessed, it no longer possesses, and so its existence is lessened. And that lessening of existence happens even though Ron still has, materially, all of the individual pieces. The more perfect a thing is, the more goodness it has, and the more we can say it exists. Now, this applies to objects like wands, as we've just seen, but it can also apply to living things, like owls. Hedwig and Arrow are both owls, but one is a reliable letter carrier, and the other, not so much.
Oh, fetch it, will you, Percy, please?
It also applies to muggles and wizards, but more on that in future videos. So being equals goodness, and a thing is good only to the extent that it's also perfect. Now I want to add one more element to the mix here, and that is truth. We started with the idea of being or existence, and when that being is desired in our hearts, it's called good. But when that being is understood in our minds, we call it truth. Reality, being, existence, it's all around us. And when that reality out there is correctly grasped in here, then we have a true idea of things. Then the truth is within us. Throughout the Harry Potter series, there is a contrast, a marked contrast, between the good characters who see the truth and the evil characters who are blind to it. One very good example of this would be how each side treats house elves.
Why don't you sit down?
Sit down. Sit down.
Dobby, shush, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you or anything.
Offend Dobby? Dobby has heard of your greatness, sir, but never has he been asked to sit down by a wizard like an equal.
But the Malfoys never see the goodness of the house elves and treat them accordingly.
Come, Dobby. We're leaving.
When Voldemort and the Malfoys lock up some prisoners in the basement of Malfoy Mansion, they forget about house elves, that they can apparate in the places that wizards cannot. And they forgot about this precisely because they were in the habit of disdaining and disregarding the magic of non-wizards.
Are you saying you can apparate in and out of this room? Could you take us with you?
Of course, I'm an elf.
Now, with everything I've said so far about goodness equaling being or existence, it naturally leads to the question of evil. What is evil? If goodness equals existence, then it would seem that, well, evil equals non-existence or nothing at all. But that leads to another question. If evil is nothing, why is there so much of it in the world? We need to distinguish between two types of nothing. The first type of nothing is simply nothing. That's one sort of nothing. The other sort of nothing is when something that should be there isn't. When food spoils, it loses its structure and is eaten away by mold and other such things. There is also the nothing of death. When Lupin and Tonks are hit by a killing curse, their bodies remain largely the same, but their souls are not in them, animating those bodies. When they were alive, they had bodies, single, united living organisms. But after they died, they had a corpse, a lump of skells and a skeleton physically held together, but without any life of its own. That corpse should have been a living, breathing body, but it wasn't. Lupin and Tonks suffered the evil of death and lost the goodness and perfection of being alive. Even morally speaking, we can get at least an intuition at this point of how evil is a lack of what ought to be there in the first place. We know that Voldemort has many followers. He even had them at a very young age, but he never had friends. The affection, the joy, the love that we see between Harry and Hermione and Ron is missing from Voldemort's life and his heart, and it ought to be there. Lies are also evil for this reason. They distort the reality that words ought to reveal. Voldemort tempts Ron to kill Harry instead of destroying the Horcrux by feeding him the lie that he's unloved. Voldemort uses a lie to try and separate Ron from the love of his mother and his best friend.
I have seen your heart, and it is mine.
He knows that if he can hide the truth of that love from Ron,
I have seen your dreams, Ronald Weasley, and I have seen your fears.
then Ron will not be able to cling to that goodness
Least loved by your mother who craved a daughter.
and to love in return.
Least loved by the girl who prefers your friend.
We were better without you. Happier without you.
Who could look at you compared to Harry Potter? What are you compared with the chosen one?
Ron, it's lying! Your mother confessed she would have preferred me as a son.
What woman would take you? You are nothing. Nothing. Nothing compared to him.
But Ron rejects the lie, and once the truth enters his mind, he is able to do the right thing. We began this video with the question of goodness. What is goodness? And we've seen that goodness at its core is the same as both being and truth. We're just looking at one reality from different angles. When we see that being or that goodness with our minds, well, we call it the truth. And evil, real evil, is when something isn't there that should be. And that is the foundation of everything else that we're going to say about morality. The next 3 videos are going to delve deeper into the connection between being a moral person and being a happy person. No, we don't actually need to choose between one or the other. In fact, at the end of the day, we can only have both or neither. But you need to watch the next video to find out what it is that we really want. Please visit preachingfriars.org or subscribe to my YouTube channel to see all my videos. Thank you for watching, and remember to read lots, pray more, and keep the faith.